The moon hung like a judge's eye over the northern keep, cold and absolute. Silver light bled across the marble courtyard where carriages rolled in procession, each one carrying nobles draped in silk and ambition. The Moonfall Ball had begun, and with it, the deadly theater of alliance and betrayal that defined wolf politics. Elara Thorne stepped from the hired coach with practiced grace, her fingers trembling only slightly as she adjusted the pearl mask across her face. The mask was stolen, lifted from a merchant's daughter 3 towns back. The gown was borrowed, the credentials forged, and the name she would give tonight belonged to a woman who died 2 winters past. Everything about her presence here was a lie except for one thing: her purpose. The guards at the gate barely glanced at her papers. Lady Marin Silverlake of the Western Highlands, the documents claimed, niece to a minor lord whose loyalty meant nothing and whose absence would be noticed by no one. The guard waved her through with the bored efficiency of a man who'd checked 200 such papers already tonight. Inside, the great hall blazed with 1,000 candles. Their light caught on mirrors that lined every wall, multiplying the crowd until it seemed the entire world had gathered beneath this vaulted ceiling. Music swelled from the orchestra pit, violins weaving through the low thunder of conversation. The scent of wine and perfume smoke hung thick in the air, mixed with something sharper: wolf musk. Dominance and territoriality masked beneath civilization's thin veneer. Elara moved through the edges of the ballroom, her eyes tracking not the dancers, but the architecture. 3 exits visible from here, plus the servants' passages behind the tapestries. Guard rotations every 12 minutes. She'd timed them from outside. The war room lay adjacent to the main hall, accessible through the eastern corridor past the refreshment tables. Her father had taught her to read battlefields before she could read books. How terrain shaped conflict. How supply lines determined victory. How the smallest detail, the angle of light on a sword or the direction of the wind, could mean the difference between survival and slaughter. General Marcus Thorne had been the finest strategic mind in 3 kingdoms. The nobles had called him the cartographer because he could look at a map and see not just geography, but possibility, probability, death and salvation written in the curve of a river or the shadow of a mountain. They'd also called him traitor before they cut his head from his shoulders. Elara had been 21, standing in the crowd, watching as the Alpha King's son raised the executioner's blade. She remembered how her father had refused the blindfold, how his eyes had found hers in that final moment, and how he'd mouthed 3 words she'd spent 7 years trying to understand. Finish what I started. She didn't know what he'd meant. Not then, but she knew where to find answers. In the maps and documents the crown had seized from his study, in the military intelligence that had condemned him, in the war room where strategies were drawn and men's fates decided with the stroke of a pen. Tonight, she would take back what they'd stolen, and if fortune smiled, she would learn the truth that had cost her father his life. The crowd thickened near the center of the hall where the dancing had begun. Elara slipped past a cluster of courtiers debating the border conflicts, their voices pitched low with the gravity of men discussing matters they barely understood. The war with the Western Pax had dragged on for 3 years, bleeding resources and lives in equal measure. Everyone had opinions. Few had solutions. She reached the refreshment table and took a glass of wine she wouldn't drink, using it as cover while her eyes traced the path to the eastern corridor. 2 guards stood at the entrance, but their attention fixed on the ballroom, not the passage behind them. A blind spot. Her father would have exploited it instantly. The orchestra shifted to a waltz, the tempo increasing. More couples flooded the floor, and the guards' gazes followed the movement. Elara set down her glass and moved. 3 steps into the corridor and the noise of the ball faded behind thick tapestries. The stone walls here were older, darker, untouched by the decorative excess of the public spaces. This was the working heart of the keep, where power lived without pretense. Her soft shoes made no sound on the flagstones. She counted doorways as she passed. Storage, meeting chamber, library, and there, at the end where the corridor bent left, a door marked with the wolf and crown sigil. The war room. No guards here. They were all deployed to the ball, to the perimeter, to the visible places where threats were expected. No one anticipated danger from within, from a woman in a stolen dress with her father's gift for seeing what others missed. The lock was simple, designed more for privacy than security. Elara drew a thin strip of steel from her sleeve, a lockpick her father had made for her 10th birthday, back when he'd still believed teaching a daughter such skills was wisdom rather than dangerous sentiment. The mechanism clicked. The door swung inward on oiled hinges. The war room smelled of parchment and lamp oil. A single candelabra burned low on the massive oak table that dominated the space, its surface buried beneath maps. Elara's breath caught. She'd expected documents, correspondence, supply ledgers. But this was better. This was the living strategy of the kingdom's war effort, spread out like a dissected body waiting for analysis. She moved to the table, her fingers hovering over the nearest map. The northern border, marked with colored pins denoting troop positions. Blue for the Crown's forces. Red for the Western Pacts. The concentrations told a story to anyone trained to read it. 12,000 enemy troops across 3 fronts, exactly as the rumors claimed. But the deployment pattern was wrong. Too concentrated in the center, too thin on the flanks. Either the Western commanders were incompetent, or this was misdirection. A feint designed to draw the Crown's forces into overcommitting to the central front, while the real attack came from the sides. Elara's mind worked faster now, her father's training taking over. She traced supply lines marked in faded ink. The Crown's logistics stretched from the capital through 2 mountain passes that would close with the first heavy snow. 6 weeks, maybe 8 before winter made resupply impossible. And the troop concentrations were positioned as if the campaign would extend through winter. Suicide. The army would starve or freeze long before they could force a decisive engagement. She pulled out a small notebook, began sketching the positions, noting the numerical strengths marked on each pin. Her hand moved with practiced efficiency, translating 3-dimensional strategic reality into 2-dimensional intelligence. This was what she'd come for. Proof of incompetence or proof of something worse. Evidence to understand what her father had seen, what knowledge had marked him for execution. The sound came from behind her, not the door, but from the shadows near the far wall. A voice, deep and measured, carrying the weight of absolute authority. Most people see positions and numbers. You see the lie beneath them. Elara spun, her hand instinctively reaching for a weapon she didn't carry. Her heart hammered against her ribs as a figure stepped from the darkness where no one should have been standing. He was tall, broader through the shoulders than any man she'd seen, dressed not in ball finery, but in the dark leathers of field command. No crown, no ornament, just the simple practicality of a warrior who'd learned that survival mattered more than symbolism. His face was angular, weathered by wind and sun and decisions that left marks deeper than any blade. His eyes caught the candlelight reflecting gold, the unmistakable mark of alpha blood. Ronan Ashcroft, the king's son, the man who'd swung the blade that took her father's head. Her mind screamed run, but her body had frozen, every instinct torn between flight and the terrible fascination of standing 3 feet from the man she'd sworn to destroy. The central concentration is a feint, he said, moving closer to the table. His gaze didn't fix on her, but on the maps, as if they were having a casual discussion, rather than a confrontation that should end with her arrest. Any competent analyst would see that within 30 seconds of studying the deployment. Elara's mouth had gone dry, but her father's training pushed words past the fear. Then your generals are incompetent or blind. Neither. They see what they expect to see. He lifted one of the blue pins, studying it between his fingers. Men who have fought the same enemy for 3 years stop questioning their assumptions. They mark positions and call it strategy. And what do you call it? He looked at her then, really looked, and she felt the full weight of that golden stare. Not angry, not even particularly surprised, just intensely, dangerously curious. I call it the reason I've been losing too many soldiers for too little gain. He set the pin down and gestured to her notebook. You documented the supply line vulnerability, the mountain passes, the timeline before winter closes them. It wasn't a question. Elara's hand tightened on the notebook, her mind racing through options. Deny everything. Claim ignorance. Run. But something in his expression stopped her. He wasn't looking at her like a thief or an enemy. He was looking at her the way her father used to look at a particularly elegant solution to an impossible problem. With respect. Your logistics can't support the current deployment through winter, she heard herself say. Either you force engagement within 6 weeks, or you pull back before the passes close. Anything else is a death sentence for your men. Correct. He moved around the table, his fingers tracing the supply routes she'd been analyzing. I've been arguing this point with my war council for 2 months. They insist we maintain pressure, that withdrawal signals weakness. They're more concerned with political optics than tactical reality. Then they're fools. A smile ghosted across his face, brief and sharp as a knife in moonlight. Yes, but they're the fools who command my armies. He stopped directly across from her, the width of the oak table between them. This close, she could see the fine scars that marked his hands, the calluses of a man who'd held a sword more often than a scepter. There was exhaustion in the lines around his eyes, the kind that came not from lack of sleep, but from carrying weight that never lifted. Who trained you? He asked quietly. The question landed like a blow. For a moment, Elara considered lying, weaving some story about a tutor or natural talent. But the truth was rising in her throat, 7 years of grief and rage demanding acknowledgement. General Marcus Thorne. He taught me to read terrain before I could read words, to see strategy in the shape of clouds and the flight of birds, to understand that every war is won or lost in the logistics long before the first blade is drawn. She watched his face for reaction. Anger, perhaps. Guilt. Some flicker of the monster she'd built him into over 7 years of hate. What she saw instead was pain. Raw and unguarded, there for just a heartbeat before his expression closed again into careful neutrality. Marcus Thorne's daughter, he said, and it wasn't a question. Elara Thorne, though I doubt that name appears on your guest list tonight. No, it doesn't. He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant, as if seeing through the walls of some other time. Your father was the finest strategic mind I've ever encountered. Every battle he planned, we won. Every position he fortified, held. He saw 10 moves ahead when the rest of us were still counting the pieces on the board. And yet you executed him. The words hung in the air between them, sharp and unforgiving. Ronan's jaw tightened, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the texture of gravel and regret. I followed my father's orders. The king commanded, and I obeyed. I was 29 years old and still believed that loyalty meant doing what you're told, even when everything inside you screams that it's wrong. He moved to the window, his back to her now, silhouette dark against the moonlight. I begged him to spare Marcus, went to him the night before the execution, laid out every argument I could think of. Your father's value to the kingdom, his years of service, the lack of concrete evidence for the charges. My father listened to it all, and then he said something I'll never forget. He said that men like Marcus Thorne are dangerous precisely because they are valuable, because people follow them, believe them. And when a man like that questions the crown's authority, you don't debate him. You remove him before his questions become contagion. Elara's hands had clenched into fists, nails biting into her palms. So you killed him to silence him. The crown killed him to preserve itself. I was just the instrument. Ronan turned back to face her, and in his eyes she saw something she hadn't expected. Shame, deep and corrosive, the kind that didn't fade with time. I've spent every day since trying to be worthy of the man I helped destroy, trying to lead with the wisdom he showed and the honor my father lacked. Some days I think I'm succeeding. Most days I know I'm failing. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant sound of music from the ballroom. Elara's mind churned, trying to reconcile 7 years of cultivated hatred with the man standing before her. He should be a monster, should be easy to despise. But the grief in his voice, the weight he carried, it was too familiar. Too much like the burden she'd been carrying herself. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Ronan moved back to the table, his hands spreading across the maps. Because you came here for answers, and I'm tired of lies. Because you can read these deployments better than any officer in my command. And because your father died trying to tell me something I was too young and too obedient to hear. He looked up at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. Help me finish what he started. Prove that Marcus Thorne wasn't a traitor, but a patriot who saw the rot in the system and tried to cut it out. Work with me to win this war the right way, with strategy and honor instead of blunt force and pride. 6 months, that's all I ask. Be my strategic advisor. Analyze my campaigns, point out the flaws my generals are too proud or too stupid to see. And when the war is over, you walk away free. No claims, no bonds, no obligations except to the truth and to your father's memory. Elara stared at him, her mind reeling. This was insane. Work with her father's executioner. Trust the son of the king who'd ordered Marcus Thorne's death. Every instinct screamed betrayal, warned her this was a trap, manipulation disguised as partnership. But another part of her, the part her father had trained, saw the logic beneath the emotion. Saw the opportunity. If Ronan was sincere, she would have access to everything. All the military intelligence, all the strategic documents, all the evidence she needed to understand what her father had discovered. And if he was lying, if this was some elaborate game, she would be perfectly positioned to sabotage from within. I want it in writing, she said, a blood oath legally binding. 6 months as strategic advisor, then my freedom. No claims, no leverage, no political marriages or convenient accidents. Ronan nodded once, sharp and decisive. Agreed, we'll draft the contract tonight. And I want access to everything. All intelligence, all reports, all council meetings. If I'm going to advise you, I need the complete picture. You'll have it. One more condition. She met his eyes, letting him see the steel beneath her fear. If I discover my father was framed, if there's evidence of conspiracy or false charges, you help me clear his name, publicly, before the entire court. Something flickered across Ronan's face. Hesitation, perhaps, or calculation. Then he extended his hand across the table. If the evidence supports it, I'll stand beside you and proclaim his innocence myself. You have my word. Elara looked at his hand. Scarred. Steady. The hand that had held the blade. The hand now offering partnership. Her father's voice echoed in memory. Finish what I started. Maybe this was how. Maybe the truth wasn't found in revenge, but in understanding. In seeing the full picture, not just the pieces that fit her grief. She reached out and clasped his hand. His grip was firm, warm, surprisingly gentle for a man built for violence. The touch lasted only a moment, but she felt something shift in it. A contract sealed, an alliance formed, the beginning of something she couldn't yet name. We should return to the ball before your absence is noted, Ronan said, releasing her hand. Tomorrow morning, I'll introduce you to the War Council, prepared to be unpopular. They don't take well to outsiders, especially ones who point out their mistakes. I'm not here to make friends. Good, because you won't. He moved toward the door, then paused. The name you're using tonight, Lady Marin Silverlake. It won't survive scrutiny beyond this evening. Tomorrow you'll need to be Elara Thorne, the general's daughter. Can you bear that? She thought of the looks, the whispers, the contempt she'd face when they learned who she was. The daughter of the traitor, the cursed bloodline. All the poison her father's execution had spread across her name. I've borne worse. Ronan's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Yes, I imagine you have. They returned to the ball through different routes, maintaining the fiction of strangers who'd never met. Elara slipped back into the crowd, her mind still processing everything that had happened in that war room. She'd come for theft and left with partnership. Had come for revenge and found something more complicated than hate. The rest of the evening blurred past in a haze of forced smiles and empty conversation. She danced when protocol demanded, answered questions about the fictional Lady Silverlake's fictional life, and all the while her thoughts kept returning to the maps in the war room and the man who'd offered her the one thing she'd never expected. A chance to finish her father's work. Near midnight, a commotion rippled through the ballroom. A messenger in mud-stained riding leathers pushed through the crowd, ignoring protocol and propriety in his urgency. He went straight to Ronan, who'd been holding court with a cluster of nobles near the throne dais. Elara watched from across the room as Ronan read the message, his face going stone still. He spoke briefly to the messenger, his words too quiet to carry, then turned to address the room. Lords and ladies, I must ask your understanding. Urgent military business requires my immediate attention. Please continue to enjoy the hospitality of the keep. The ball will proceed without me." The crowd murmured, speculation spreading like ripples on water. Ronan's eyes found Elara's across the sea of faces, and in that look she read urgency and grim purpose. He jerked his head toward the eastern quarter, a silent command. She extricated herself from a conversation about grain prices and made her way through the crowd. By the time she reached the war room, Ronan was already there, the message spread on the table alongside the deployment maps. "What happened?" she asked. "Border Outpost 17 fell 2 hours ago. Complete garrison loss. 200 men." His voice was flat, controlled, but she could hear the rage beneath it, the grief. "No survivors, no warning. The attack came at shift change when defenses were transitioning." Elara moved to the table, studying the message in the map position. Outpost 17 guarded the northern approach through the Grey March Pass. Not strategically critical on its own, but its fall opened a corridor for enemy advancement. "Shift change timing isn't common knowledge," she said slowly. "Patrol schedules are classified military intelligence." Ronan's jaw clenched. Exactly what I was thinking. The attack wasn't opportunistic. It was coordinated, precise. She traced the supply routes that passed near the outpost. "Whoever planned this knew your operational schedules down to the quarter hour." "Which means?" She looked up at him, saw that he already knew the answer, but needed to hear it confirmed. Needed someone else to voice the ugly truth. "You have a spy in your command, probably high-ranking enough to access detailed operational intelligence, someone close enough to know not just troop movements, but the internal timing of guard rotations." Ronan's fist came down on the table, not in rage, but in bitter acknowledgement. 200 men dead because someone in my inner circle is feeding intelligence to the enemy. "We find them," Elara said, her voice hard. "We find them and we make them pay for every life they've cost." He looked at her then, and something had shifted in his expression. No longer the careful distance of king to subject or commander to potential advisor. This was something rawer. Partnership forged in shared purpose and shared fury. "Tomorrow morning," Authority said, "War Council was to chain in. You'll be there. Not as Lady Silverlake or even as my strategic advisor, as Elara Thorne, daughter of Marcus Thorne, the finest military mind this kingdom has ever produced. Let them whisper and hate. We have traitors to hunt and a war to win." Elara felt something fierce and bright kindle in her chest. For 7 years she'd nursed her grief in isolation, her rage feeding only on itself. But standing here, looking at the maps that represented thousands of lives in the balance, she understood what her father had tried to tell her in those final moments. The work mattered more than the wound. The mission mattered more than the man. And maybe, just maybe, finishing what he started meant working with the people he'd died opposing. Meant finding truth in the complexity rather than comfort in the simple narrative of revenge. "Dawn then," she said, "I'll be ready." Ronan nodded, then began gathering the maps and messages, preparing for the long night of analysis ahead. As Elara turned to leave, his voice stopped her. "Your father would be proud of you. The way you read those deployments tonight, the questions you asked, the conclusions you drew. That's his legacy, not the execution or the accusations. The mind he trained and the daughter who carries his wisdom forward." The words hit harder than any blow, bringing sudden heat to her eyes that she blinked away furiously. She didn't trust herself to speak, so she simply nodded and left before emotion could overwhelm discipline. Outside, the moon had climbed higher, its light cold and clear. The ball continued somewhere behind her, music and laughter echoing through stone halls that had seen 1,000 such nights and would see 1,000 more. But something had changed tonight. Some shift in the pattern, some new possibility opening. Elara pulled her cloak tight against the autumn chill and walked toward the guest quarters they'd arranged for Lady Silverlake. Tomorrow she would shed that false name and claim her true one. Would walk into that war council and face the men who'd celebrated her father's death. Would begin the work of understanding what Marcus Thorne had died to protect. The moonlight painted her shadow long across the courtyard stones, and she thought of her father's final words. "Finish what I started." She didn't know yet what that meant, what truth waited to be uncovered or what battles lay ahead. But she knew this much with absolute certainty. The war for the Northern Kingdom's soul had just begun, and she intended to win it. Not with vengeance, but with the weapon her father had given her. The ability to see what others missed, to find patterns in chaos, to turn information into victory and knowledge into power. She was Marcus Thorne's daughter, and she was ready to prove exactly what that meant. The night air tasted of smoke and coming snow. Somewhere beyond the keep's walls, 200 men lay dead in the ruins of an outpost, their lives traded for intelligence and strategic advantage. Somewhere in the halls of power, a traitor walked free, feeding secrets to the enemy and counting the cost in other people's blood. Elara looked up at the moon, that cold witness to all the kingdom's sins and sorrows, and made a silent promise. To the 200 dead, to her father's memory, to the truth, whatever it cost to find. She would hunt this spy, would tear apart the conspiracy that had killed Marcus Thorne, would stand before the kingdom and prove his innocence or die trying. But first, she had a war council to attend, and generals to terrify with the ghost of the man they'd helped destroy. Dawn would come soon enough, and with it, the real work would begin. The ball ended near midnight, the last dancers stumbling drunk and satisfied into the cold night. Servants began the work of cleaning, collecting abandoned glasses and wilted flowers, erasing the evidence of celebration as if it had never been. In the war room, a single candle still burned. Ronan Ashcroft stood over the maps, marking new positions, running calculations of time and distance and the cost of command. The message about the fallen outpost lay beside him, the ink already fading, but the names of the dead burned permanent into memory. 200 men, 200 fathers and brothers and sons who trusted him to lead them well and had paid for someone else's betrayal with their lives. He'd carry those names with all the others. Add them to the weight that never lifted, the burden that came with the crown and the command. Every decision a gamble with other people's futures, every mistake measured in graves. But tonight, for the first time in 7 years, he felt something that might have been hope. Marcus Thorne's daughter had walked into his war room and seen what no one else could see, had analyzed his deployments and found the flaws his trained generals missed, had stood before him without fear or deference and spoken truth with her father's clarity. If she was half the strategist Marcus had been, and if she truly meant to honor his legacy rather than avenge his death, then maybe there was a chance. Maybe this war could be won with intelligence rather than attrition. Maybe the system could be changed from within rather than destroyed and rebuilt. Maybe redemption was possible after all. Ronan extinguished the candle and left the war room in darkness. Tomorrow would bring conflict and challenge enough. Tonight, he would take what rest he could and prepare for the storm he'd invited by offering partnership to the daughter of the man he'd killed. The keep settled into silence around him, stone and shadow, and the weight of history. Above it all, the moon watched and waited, patient as only the eternal could be. And in the guest quarters, Elara Thorne lay awake, staring at the ceiling and wondering if her father would approve of what she'd agreed to tonight. Partnership with the enemy, alliance with her grief. The calculated risk of trusting the man who'd taken everything. Sleep wouldn't come, so she rose and went to the window. Below, the courtyard lay empty, the celebration's debris scattered and forgotten. Beyond the walls, the kingdom stretched dark and troubled, bleeding from a war that had lasted too long and cost too much. She thought of the 200 dead soldiers, thought of the spy who'd sold them for whatever price traders demanded these days, thought of her father, standing on the scaffold with his head held high, refusing the blindfold because he wanted to see the world clearly even at the end. Especially at the end. "I'm going to finish it, Papa," she whispered to the night. "Whatever you started, whatever truth you died protecting, I'm going to find it, and I'm going to make them see that you were right." The moon offered no answer, but then she hadn't expected one. Some promises were made to the dead. Some vows spoken to memory and grief and the cold determination to make meaning from loss. Tomorrow would test her like nothing had before. Would demand she stand in rooms filled with her father's enemies and prove herself worthy of his legacy. Would require strength she wasn't sure she possessed and wisdom she was still learning. But she was Marcus Thorne's daughter, had been raised on strategy and sacrifice, had learned that wars were won in the preparation, not the execution. In the careful analysis, in the willingness to see truth no matter how uncomfortable. She was ready, or if not ready, then willing. And sometimes what mattered more than readiness. The night deepened. Stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. And in the northern keep, two people lay awake in separate chambers, both thinking of the same thing. The work that waited, the truth that needed finding, the war that demanded winning. Dawn would come, as it always did, bringing light and revelation in the hard choices that defined who survived and who fell. But that was tomorrow's burden. Tonight, there was only the quiet, the darkness, and the fragile, dangerous thing called hope beginning to kindle in the spaces between grief and duty. The moon watched it all, patient and pitiless, and the game, as always, continued. Dawn came cold and gray, the kind of morning that promised nothing but hard truths and harder decisions. Elara stood before the mirror in her quarters, no longer wearing the borrowed silks of Lady Silverlake, but the simple traveling clothes she'd arrived in. Dark wool, practical boots, a leather belt that had belonged to her father. No jewelry, no ornament, nothing but the steel lockpick tucked in her sleeve and the weight of her family name settling back onto her shoulders like armor. Today she would walk into the War Council as Elara Thorne, would face the men who'd called her father traitor and see in their eyes what they thought of his daughter. She was ready. The war room looked different in daylight, harsher. The maps that had seemed almost elegant by candlelight now showed themselves as tools of death, each colored pin representing men who would kill or die based on decisions made in this room. The long table could seat 20, but this morning only 12 gathered. Ronan's inner circle, the generals and advisors who planned campaigns and counted casualties and slept soundly despite the blood on their strategies. Ronan sat at the head of the table, dressed in the same field leathers from the night before. He looked like he hadn't slept, exhaustion written in the tightness around his eyes and the stubble darkening his jaw. When Elara entered, every head turned. The conversation died. "Gentlemen," Ronan said, his voice carrying the flat authority of command, "this is Elara Thorne. Some of you will remember her father, General Marcus Thorne, who served this kingdom with distinction before his execution 7 years ago. She has agreed to serve as strategic advisor for the duration of the current campaign." The silence that followed was not surprise but confirmation. They'd already known, had spent the hours since dawn preparing their opposition, sharpening their arguments against the traitor's daughter, presuming to advise them on warfare. General Corvin spoke first, a bull of a man with gray shot through his beard and scars mapping his face like a veteran's resume. "With respect, Your Majesty, this is irregular. Miss Thorne has no military commission, no formal training, no experience in actual combat command. Her presence here is a distraction we cannot afford. Her analysis of last night's deployment maps was more accurate than your last 6 tactical briefings combined," Ronan said mildly. "In 30 seconds, she identified the central front concentration as a feint, mapped our supply line vulnerabilities, and calculated the exact timeline before winter closes the mountain passes. Can any officer at this table claim the same?" Silence. Grudging, resentful silence. Elara remained standing, forcing them to look up at her. A small advantage, but in rooms like this, small advantages were the only kind you got. "The outpost that fell last night," she said, pitching her voice to Carrie. 17, guarding the northern approach through Grey March Pass. The attack came at shift change, 1800 hours, when the day patrol rotates with the night watch. That timing isn't accidental. She moved to the map table, her finger tracing the position. Shift schedules are classified intelligence, updated weekly and distributed only to command staff and the affected units. Someone with access to that distribution list fed the enemy precise timing data. That's how 200 men died without sending a single warning. The generals exchanged glances, uncomfortable now. The accusation hung in the air like smoke, choking and inescapable. "You're suggesting a spy," another officer said. Colonel Marcus, younger than Corvin, his uniform pressed and perfect, in a way that suggested he spent more time in offices than battlefields. "That's a serious charge, Miss Thorne." "It's the only logical conclusion. The alternative is that the Western pacts have developed precognitive abilities, or that our operational security is so compromised that classified schedules are common knowledge among the enemy. I'm willing to bet on espionage over magic. Ronan leaned forward. The question becomes how we identify the source. The distribution list for shift schedules includes everyone in this room, plus the outpost commanders themselves. 16 people had access to the intelligence that got those men killed. Elara pulled out her notebook, flipping to the page where she'd worked through the logistics the night before. Sleep had been impossible, so she'd done what her father taught her. Analyzed, calculated, narrowed the probabilities until the picture clarified. We cross-referenced, she said, every intelligence leak over the past 6 months against the individuals who had access to that specific information. Build a pattern. Spies are creatures of habit. They have methods, channels, schedules of their own. Find the pattern, and we find the spy. The room had gone very quiet. These were men who'd spent careers in military service, who'd commanded thousands and planned campaigns. And here was a woman barely past her mid-20s, daughter of an executed traitor, telling them how to hunt wolves in their own den. The resentment was palpable. But so was something else. A grudging recognition that she knew what she was talking about, that her analysis was sound. I'll need access to all classified briefings for the past 6 months, Elara continued. Communications logs, dispatch records, personnel movements, everything that tracks who knew what and when they knew it. General Corvin's face had gone red. That's half the military intelligence of this kingdom. You expect us to hand it over to a civilian? To the daughter of a man executed for treason? My father was executed for threatening to expose corruption, Elara said, her voice cold as winter steel. He saw something in these records, or these deployments, that marked him for death. Maybe it was incompetence. Maybe it was conspiracy. Either way, I intend to find it. And if that makes you uncomfortable, General, perhaps you should ask yourself why. Corvin surged to his feet, his chair scraping back. How dare you? Sit down. Ronan's voice cracked like a whip, not loud but absolute. The voice of a man who'd commanded in the field where disobedience meant death. She has my authority to access whatever intelligence she requires. Any officer who obstructs her investigation will answer to me personally. Is that clear? Corvin sat slowly, his jaw working. Around the table, the other officers exchanged glances. Lines being drawn. Loyalties tested. We have 8 suspects based on the outpost 17 intelligence, Ronan said. Every officer in this room had access to those shift schedules. We'll start there. Elara will conduct individual interviews. You will cooperate fully. Dismissed. They filed out in silence, leaving only Ronan and Elara and one other man who'd sat quietly through the entire meeting. He was older than most of the others, weathered by years of hard service, with the look of someone who'd seen too much combat and survived through equal parts skill and luck. His left arm ended at the elbow, the empty sleeve pinned neatly. Captain Cale Stone, according to the nameplate before him. You believe it's one of us, Cale said after the others had gone. Not a question, an acknowledgement. The evidence points to someone with command-level access, Elara replied carefully. That includes everyone who was in this room, including me. Cale's expression didn't change. I lost this arm saving his life 4 years ago. Took a blade meant for his throat, but I suppose loyalty can be bought or broken, same as anything else. That's not what she's saying, Ronan said quietly. Isn't it? Cale stood, his movements precise despite the missing limb. I've served beside you for 15 years, fought in every campaign, bled in every battle, and now I'm suspect number 1 because I had access to shift schedules. He looked at Elara. Your father was a good man, better than most who wear the crown. But you're chasing ghosts if you think the enemy needs spies to beat us. They're winning because we're spread too thin, supplied too poorly, and led by generals more concerned with glory than victory. He walked to the door, paused. I'll cooperate with your investigation, Miss Thorne. I've got nothing to hide. But you might consider that the real betrayal isn't espionage. It's the system that sends good men to die for bad strategy. The door closed behind him with careful precision. He's right about the strategy, Elara said after a moment. The current deployments are unsustainable, but that doesn't mean there isn't also a spy. I know. Ronan looked exhausted. Cale's been with me since before my father died. He's saved my life more times than I can count. If he's the spy, Then we deal with it, same as any other traitor. The words came out harsher than she'd intended. Personal loyalty can't override duty. Easy to say when it's not your brother bleeding on the floor. Ronan's eyes met hers, and she saw something raw there. Pain that had nothing to do with military intelligence and everything to do with the cost of command. Every man in that room has fought beside me, trusted me, followed orders that sent them into hell because they believed I'd bring them out again. If one of them is selling us out, it's not just betrayal of the kingdom. It's betrayal of every bond that makes this kind of leadership possible. Elara understood then. The weight he carried wasn't just the crown or the command. It was the knowledge that war turned brothers into enemies, that trust was just another casualty, and that sometimes the hardest order you gave was the one that destroyed the people you loved most. Her father had carried that weight. She'd seen it in his eyes those last years, the way he'd grown quieter, more withdrawn, as if the burden of knowing things he couldn't speak had slowly crushed something essential in him. Then we find the truth, she said softly, and we deal with it together. The next 3 days blurred into a marathon of investigation. Elara worked from a small office adjacent to the war room, surrounded by stacks of dispatch logs and intelligence briefings. She built timelines, cross-referenced personnel movements, tracked every piece of classified information that had leaked to the enemy over the past 6 months. The pattern emerged slowly, like a picture developing in chemical solution. 17 separate intelligence breaches, each one corresponding to information that had been briefed to command staff. But the access varied. Some intel had been distributed to all 12 council members, others to smaller subgroups. She mapped it out on parchment, creating a web of connections. If she could find which officer had access to all 17 pieces of compromised intelligence, she'd have her spy. The problem was that 4 officers matched that profile: Corvin, Marcus, Kao, and one other, a logistics officer named Brent, who'd sat silent through most meetings but had access to everything through his role managing supply chains. 4 suspects, not enough to shows, not enough to act. Ronan visited her office each evening after the day's military business concluded. Sometimes they discussed the investigation. More often, they talked strategy, going over the current deployments and looking for ways to stabilize the deteriorating situation on the borders. It was during one of these sessions that Elara noticed it. A subtle tension in Ronan's shoulders when she mentioned Kael's name. The way his hand would pause over the maps, just for a heartbeat, before continuing. "You think it's him?" she said quietly. Ronan didn't answer immediately. He stood at the window looking out over the training yards where soldiers drilled in formations, their movements precise and deadly. "I think I'm afraid it might be, which is different from thinking it is." "What's your evidence?" "Nothing concrete. Just small things. The way he's been avoiding my eyes lately. How he volunteers for reconnaissance missions more than usual, like he's trying to prove his loyalty. And 3 months ago, he asked for extended leave to visit his daughter in the Southern Territories. That's when several of the leaks started." Elara made a note. "Does he visit her often?" "Not in years. She lives with her mother, my ex-wife's sister. There's bad blood there. For Kael to suddenly reconnect seemed odd at the time, but I didn't question it. He's entitled to his personal life." "Where exactly in the Southern Territories?" Ronan told her. Elara pulled out a regional map, marked the location, then overlaid it with the known positions of Western Pact forces. The town was 10 miles from enemy lines. "That could be coincidence," Ronan said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Or it could be a dead-drop location. Meet his daughter publicly, pass information privately." She looked up at him. "You need to confront him." "I need proof first." Sometimes proof comes from the confrontation. That night, Ronan summoned Kael to a private meeting room. Small, secure, just the 3 of them and the weight of 15 years of brotherhood hanging in the balance. Kael entered calmly, his expression neutral. He'd worn his dress uniform, the empty sleeve pinned with military precision. When he saw Elara, something flickered in his eyes. Resignation, perhaps. Or relief. "You know," he said simply. Ronan's face might have been carved from stone. "Know what?" "That I'm the leak, that I've been feeding intelligence to Commander Thane for the past 4 months. Kael's voice was steady, matter of fact, as if reporting on weather conditions rather than treason. I didn't want to. God knows I fought against it, but they have my daughter. The words landed like artillery shells. Elara saw Ronan flinch as if struck, saw the color drain from his face, and then return in a flush of rage and grief combined. Explain. One word. Clipped. Dangerous. Kale sat without being invited, suddenly looking decades older than his years. 4 months ago, I got a letter. No signature, no return address. Just a page torn from a book my daughter loves, one I'd read to her when she was small. And a message. Cooperate, or she dies the way Marcus Thorne died. Public. Brutal. As an example. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket, slid it across the table. Ronan picked it up with shaking hands, read it. His jaw clenched so tight Elara heard his teeth grind. They sent proof, Kale continued. Pictures of her leaving her work, walking home, details about her daily routine to show they were watching, that they could get to her whenever they wanted. I had no choice. There's always a choice, Ronan said, but the fury in his voice had cracked, revealing something closer to anguish. Not when it's your child. Kale met his eyes. You'd do the same if it were someone you loved. You'd burn the world before you let them be hurt. How many men died because of the intelligence you gave them? Elara asked quietly. I don't know. I tried to give them information that was dated or partially incorrect, fed them positions that were about to change anyway. But the outpost? His voice broke. I didn't know they'd hit so hard, didn't know they'd kill everyone. I thought it would just be a probe, a test of defenses. 200 men, Ronan said, each word a stone. 200 soldiers who trusted me to keep them safe, dead because my closest friend sold them for his daughter's life. Yes, Kale's voice was raw now, and I'll carry those names until I die. But I'd do it again, every time, because she's my daughter and I already lost too much in this goddamn war. The silence stretched, thick and choking. Elara watched them, these two men who'd fought and bled together, now separated by the brutal arithmetic of loyalty and love. There was no right answer here, no clean solution, just the mess of human choice and the consequences that followed. Finally, Ronan spoke. Where is she now? Your daughter. Still in the Southern Territory, under guard. They told me if I failed to deliver intelligence or if I was discovered, she'd be executed within the hour. Commander Thane's guards? Kale nodded. Ronan's expression shifted, calculation replacing grief. Then we use it. You continue feeding them intelligence, but now it's information we control. We turn you into a weapon against them instead of us. Kale's head snapped up. You're not executing me? I should. By every law and military code, I should drag you out to the courtyard and carry out the sentence myself. Ronan's voice was ice and iron. But I need you more than I need your death. You're going to help us win this war, and when it's over, you're going to help me get your daughter back. And then you're going to go to retire to some quiet piece of land, far from anything that matters, and you're going to live with what you did every day for the rest of your life. That's the price for mercy. And if I fail, if they discover I've turned, then your daughter dies and you live knowing you couldn't save her. But if we succeed, she comes home safe and you get to tell her what you sacrificed for her survival. Ronan leaned forward. I'm offering you a chance at redemption, Kale. One chance. Take it or reject it. But decide now. Kale's face worked, emotions warring across his features. Finally, he nodded once. Sharp. Military. What do you need me to do? Elara pulled out the maps she'd been studying, spreading them across the table. We design a deception campaign. Feed them false troop movements. Make them think we're attacking one target when we're actually hitting another. Classic misdirection, but it only works if they trust your intelligence completely. They trust it, Kale said. I've given them too much accurate information for them to doubt me now. Good. Elara's mind was already working through the probabilities, the timelines, the careful choreography of strategic lying. Ronan, your generals have been pushing for an aggressive offensive to reclaim lost territory. What if we let that plan leak? They'll prepare for it, Ronan said. Reinforce the expected targets. Exactly. Pull troops from somewhere else to strengthen the positions we're supposedly about to attack, which means the places they strip will be vulnerable. She traced her finger along the map. The Western packs control 3 major supply depots. They're expecting you to hit their fortified positions. What if instead we strike at their logistics, cut their supply lines, and force them to retreat or starve? Ronan studied the map, his tactical mind engaging with the problem. The northern depot at Ravenskeep. It's the most critical. Feeds all their forward positions along the Grey March front. If we take that, their entire northern campaign collapses within 2 weeks, Elara finished. No ammunition, no food, no winter supplies. They'd have to pull back to secondary positions or face mass casualties from exposure and starvation. It's 60 miles behind enemy lines, Kyle said. Getting a force there undetected would be nearly impossible. Not if they're expecting us to attack somewhere else. Elara pulled out a separate set of maps, one she'd been working on in secret. We stage an elaborate preparation for assaulting their fortified positions at Grey March. Visible troop movements, supply convoys heading north, reconnaissance in force. Meanwhile, a small strike team moves through the southern passes, circles behind their lines, and hits Ravenskeep before they know what's happening. Ronan's eyes lit with something between admiration and hunger. The southern passes are considered impassable this time of year. Considered, not actually impassable. My father mapped them years ago, narrow, dangerous, but viable for a small force traveling light. She met his gaze. 300 men, hit hard, burn the depot, disappear before reinforcements arrive. I'll lead it, Ronan said immediately. No, Elara's voice was flat. You're too valuable. If you're captured or killed, the entire war effort collapses. This needs someone expendable. Everyone is expendable in war. Not the king, not the man who holds this fractured kingdom together through force of will and tactical brilliance. She softened her voice slightly. You taught me that leaders command from where they can see the whole board, not from the front lines. This is a strike mission, surgical, fast. It needs a field commander, not a king. The argument lasted another hour. Ronan resistant, stubborn, every instinct pushing him toward the front because that's where he'd always fought. Elara insistent, logical, laying out every reason why his death would doom them all. In the end, it was Kyle who settled it. She's right. You know she is. Let me lead the strike. I owe you 200 lives. Let me start paying that debt. Ronan looked between them, these two people who'd entered his life under impossible circumstances and somehow become essential to his survival. Both of you are going to drive me insane. Probably, Elara agreed, but we'll win the war first. The deception campaign launched 3 days later. Ronan made a show of calling an expanded war council, including officers who'd been excluded from sensitive planning. He laid out the false offensive in detail. 3-pronged assault on Grey March fortifications. 15,000 troops. Artillery support. Exact timeline. Kale attended, took notes, asked intelligent questions. That night, he rode out on routine patrol and didn't return until dawn. The intelligence was passed. Meanwhile, Elara worked with a select few officers to plan the real operation. Southern passes mapped in detail. Supply requirements calculated down to the ounce. 300 volunteers selected from veterans who'd fought in difficult terrain. Kale would lead. Captain Brent, the logistics officer, would second him. Launch in 10 days when the false offensive reached its crescendo. Everything depended on timing and trust. On Thane believing the intelligence Kale provided. On the strike team reaching Ravenskeep undetected. On 300 men surviving a mission that by all rights should kill them. Elara tried not to think about the odds. The night before the strike team deployed, Ronan found her in her office, still working despite the late hour. He carried 2 glasses and a bottle of amber liquid that caught the lamplight like captured fire. You need to sleep, he said, pouring without asking permission. I need to verify the supply calculations one more time. If I've miscounted the water requirements, then Brent will catch it. He's been managing logistics for 12 years. Trust him. Ronan slid a glass across the desk. Drink. That's an order. She took the glass, let the liquor burn down her throat. It was good whiskey, probably older than she was. Is this how you cope? Expensive alcohol and pretending you're not sending men to die? No, this is how I acknowledge that I'm sending men to die and choosing to do it anyway because the alternative is worse. He settled into the chair across from her, suddenly looking as exhausted as she felt. Your father used to sit with me after difficult decisions. Never said much. Just shared a drink and let me know I wasn't alone with the weight. He never told me about that. He was protecting you, trying to keep the war separate from his family. Impossible task, but he tried anyway. Ronan studied his glass. The night before he was arrested, he came to me, said he'd found something in the intelligence reports, something that went all the way to the top. He wanted me to help him expose it, to stand with him against my father if necessary. Elara's breath caught. What did you say? I said I'd think about it, Tal. That I needed time to verify his claims before committing to treason. His voice was bitter. I was 29 and stupid and terrified of my father's judgment. So I hesitated, and that hesitation killed Marcus Thorne. What did he find? I don't know. He was arrested the next day. All his papers were seized. I've spent 7 years looking through military records, trying to piece together what he saw, but if it's there, it's buried too deep for me to find. He looked at her. That's another reason I wanted you here. You think like he did. See patterns no one else sees. Maybe you can find what I can't. Elara's mind was already working through the implications. Her father had found evidence of corruption or conspiracy, had approached Ronan for help, been arrested before the truth could spread, which meant someone had known about his discovery, someone close enough to act fast. The person who betrayed him was in the inner circle, she said slowly. Someone who knew he'd talk to you, someone with the authority to order his arrest. My father gave the order, but yes, someone must have reported Marcus's intentions first. Ronan's expression was grim, which means the conspiracy, whatever it is, survived my father's death, is probably still operating, and might be connected to the current espionage. Elara felt the pieces sliding into place, the pattern emerging. What if Kyle's blackmail wasn't just about winning tactical advantages? What if someone is deliberately destabilizing your command, creating chaos and distrust? To what end? To make you weak enough to replace. She stood, pacing now, her thoughts racing. Counselor Vex has been pushing for negotiated peace. Says the war is bleeding the kingdom dry. What if he's right, but not for the reasons he claims? What if the war is being prolonged deliberately to justify maintaining emergency powers, restricting rights, consolidating control? Ronan was quiet for a long moment. That's a dangerous accusation. My father died for making dangerous accusations. But he was right. I know he was right. She turned to face him. Promise me something. When we win this battle, when we stabilize the borders, promise me you'll help me investigate. Find out what really happened 7 years ago. I already promised you that. No, you promised to clear his name if the evidence supported it. I'm asking you to help me find the evidence, even if it implicates people you trust, even if it makes you uncomfortable. His eyes met hers, gold in the lamplight, steady and uncompromising. I promise. The strike team departed before dawn, 300 men slipping out of camp in small groups to avoid detection. Kale led it from the front, Brent managing the supply train, every man carrying minimal gear and maximum determination. Elara stood with Ronan on the battlements, watching them disappear into the gray pre-dawn mist. She'd done everything possible to ensure their success. Mapped routes, calculated supplies, planned contingencies. But war didn't care about planning. War ate the careful and the careless with equal appetite. 10 days, Ronan said quietly. 10 days until we know if it worked. It'll work. She made herself believe it, had to believe it. Kale's too stubborn to fail, and Brent's too competent. The false offensive launched on schedule. Visible troop movements, artillery positioning, reconnaissance probes, everything designed to draw enemy attention north while the real strike came from the south. Ronan commanded from the war room, managing the elaborate theater of deception. Elara worked beside him, tracking reports, adjusting plans as new intelligence arrived. They fell into a rhythm, a partnership of mind that felt inevitable, like pieces of a machine built to function together. On the 5th day, reports came back from scouts. Enemy forces were repositioning, massive troop movements toward Grey March. Thane had taken the bait. They're stripping their southern positions, Elara said, marking the map, pulling reserves to defend against the offensive. Raven's Keep will be vulnerable. If Kales reached it, if they weren't detected, Ronan's jaw was tight. Too many ifs. The waiting was worse than combat. At least in battle, you could act, could make decisions, and see their consequences immediately. This was slow torture, each hour crawling past while 300 men traversed deadly terrain toward an objective that might already be compromised. On the 8th day, the first crisis hit. Elara collapsed during a strategy session, her vision going white, her body convulsing. Ronan caught her before she hit the floor, his shout bringing guards running. They carried her to the medical wing while she thrashed and screamed, her skin burning with fever, strange silver marks spreading across her arms like living fire. The curse, her father's curse, the thing she'd inherited through blood and tried to ignore through will. It took 3 healers to stabilize her. When she finally woke, Ronan was there, his face drawn with exhaustion and something that might have been fear. "How long was I out?" Her voice was rough. 6 hours. The healers say you were poisoned, something that triggers dormant supernatural abilities, forces them active whether the host is ready or not. Poisoned? By who? We're investigating. But Elara, your moonfire curse, it's not dormant anymore. When you collapsed, you released a pulse of energy that killed 2 guards and melted part of the stone floor. If you hadn't been restrained, she closed her eyes, feeling the new presence coiled inside her. Power. Vast and hungry and completely beyond her control. I'm dangerous now. You were always dangerous. Now it's just more obvious. A knock at the door. One of Ronan's aides, his face pale. Your Majesty. Counselor Vex requests an emergency session. He's calling for Miss Thorne's immediate execution. Says she's too unstable to be allowed to live. Ronan's expression went cold. Tell him I'll consider his request. In the meantime, double the guard on this room. No one enters without my personal authorization. The aide left. Ronan turned back to Elara. We need to find out who poisoned you, and why. Vex. The name was bitter on her tongue. He's been opposing my presence since the beginning. This gives him the excuse he needs. Maybe, or maybe someone wanted to create that excuse. Ronan stood pacing. You've been getting close to something, digging into the past, asking questions about your father's investigation. Someone might want you removed before you find answers. Either way, I'm a liability now. Elara forced herself to sit up despite the weakness in her limbs. You should distance yourself. Let Vex have his execution. Save your political capital for battles you can win. No. Ronan, be practical. I'm one person. The kingdom is thousands. The math is obvious. He moved to her bedside, his hand finding hers. You're not a number on a tactical report. You're the person who saw through my deceptions on the first night. Who called me take on my cowardice and challenged me to be better? Who has your father's brilliance and your own fierce determination? I'm not sacrificing you to political convenience. Even if it costs you your throne, even then, his grip tightened. We stand together or we fall together. That was the deal. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with more than strategy or partnership. Something was shifting in the space where they stood, some boundary dissolving. The distance between king and advisor, between former enemies, between 2 people who'd been circling each other's grief and finding unexpected resonance in the wounds. Elara looked at their joined hands, at the silver marks still fading from her skin, at the man who'd executed her father and was now refusing to execute her. The irony was almost funny. Almost. We should find out who poisoned me, she said, before Vex forces a trial. Already working on it. Your water pitcher is being analyzed. We'll know soon. A commotion in the hallway. Shouting. The sound of steel being drawn. Ronan moved instantly, positioning himself between Elara and the door, his hand on his sword. The door burst open, but it wasn't assassins or Vex's guards. It was Kyle, mud-splattered and bleeding from a dozen cuts, his face split in a savage grin. Raven's Keep is burning, he said. Mission success. The war room erupted in controlled chaos. Kale's report was detailed and brutal. The strike team had reached Raven's Keep undetected, hit at dawn when the guard was minimal. They'd burned 4 months' worth of supplies, destroyed artillery emplacements, killed or scattered the garrison. Western Pact forces would be in full retreat within a week. Casualties, 47 dead, acceptable losses for a mission this critical. Ronan gripped Kale's shoulder, his relief palpable. Your daughter. Extraction team got her out during the confusion. She's safe at a secure location. Kale's voice cracked slightly. Thank you. Thank Elara. This was her plan. But Elara was barely listening. Her mind was working through the implications, the timeline, the pieces that didn't quite fit. Kale's mission had succeeded. The Western Pacts were crippled, which meant someone who wanted chaos and instability had just lost their primary tool, which meant they'd need a new one. The poisoning, she said slowly. It wasn't about removing me. It was about proving I'm dangerous, creating justification for something larger. Larger how? Ronan asked. Before she could answer, another messenger arrived, this one from the council chambers. Your Majesty, Councillor Vex has called for an emergency vote. He's proposing immediate reforms to the military command structure. Claims recent events prove the current system is too dependent on individual leaders, too vulnerable to supernatural threats and emotional compromises. Ronan's face went still. He's using your curse as pretext for a power grab. Not just my curse, Kale's betrayal. Your protection of both of us. Elara felt the pattern crystallizing, clear and inevitable. He's been engineering this. The poison, the timing, everything designed to make you look weak, emotional, compromised. And now he moves to strip your military authority while you're politically vulnerable. That would require him to have known about the poisoning before it happened, to have planned it. Ronan's eyes narrowed, which means Vex is connected to the conspiracy, maybe even leading it. A voice said from the doorway. I'm trying to save this kingdom from its headstrong king before he destroys us all. Councillor Vex stood framed in the entrance, flanked by 6 guards. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who'd spent 40 years navigating court politics and learning when to strike. His expression was calm, almost sympathetic. Your Majesty, Miss Thorne, I'm afraid I must insist you both attend the council session. There are questions that need answering, decisions that can't be delayed. It wasn't a request. The guards' hands rested on their sword hilts, ready but not drawn. The careful balance between respect and threat. Ronan straightened, his command presence settling over him like armor. We'll attend. But understand this, Counselor. If you're engineering a coup, you'll find I don't surrender easily. Vex smiled thinly. I'm not asking you to surrender, Your Majesty. I'm asking you to consider that sometimes the right thing and the legal thing aren't the same, and that perhaps your father understood that better than you do. The words were calculated to wound, and from Ronan's flinch, they succeeded. But he said nothing, just offered Elara his arm. Together they walked toward the council chambers, knowing that whatever waited there would reshape the kingdom one way or another. Behind them, Kale fell into step, still carrying his sword, still ready to fight. Brotherhood tested but not broken. Loyalty proven through fire and blood and impossible choices. The game was reaching its climax, and in games like this, only one side could walk away with power intact. The question was which side had been playing the longer game. The council chamber was built like an amphitheater, designed so that every voice carried and every face was visible. 12 seats for the counselors, raised on a curved dais. Below them, the speaking floor where petitioners and accused stood to make their case. Above, galleries where lesser nobles and military officers could observe the kingdom's business being conducted. Today, every seat was filled, the air thick with anticipation and the particular tension that came before power changed hands. Elara stood on the speaking floor beside Ronan, acutely aware of the silver marks still visible on her forearms where the moonfire curse had burned through her skin. Every eye in the chamber tracked those marks, calculating what they meant, how they could be used. She kept her chin level, her hands loose at her sides. Her father had taught her that showing fear was the same as admitting weakness. In rooms like this, weakness was blood in the water. Councillor Vex sat at the center of the dais, his silver hair catching the light from the high windows. He looked like what he was, a survivor who'd outlasted 3 kings and countless rivals through careful planning and impeccable timing. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of institutional authority. Your Majesty, Miss Thorne, thank you for attending. I know these past days have been difficult. His tone was sympathetic, grandfatherly almost, the kind of voice that made you want to trust it. We are here to discuss matters of kingdom security and command structure. Recent events have raised concerns that cannot be ignored. Speak plainly, Vex. Ronan's voice was hard. You've called this session to strip my military authority. At least have the courage to say it directly. A murmur ran through the galleries. Vex's expression didn't change. I'm calling this session to propose reforms that will strengthen the kingdom's stability. Your personal command has been compromised by emotional attachments and supernatural threats. This is not an attack on your character, Your Majesty. It's an acknowledgement of reality. Reality. Elara let the word hang. The reality is that under Ronan's command, we just destroyed the Western Pact's primary supply depot and crippled their entire northern campaign. The reality is that your proposed reforms come at the exact moment when we've achieved our first major victory in 3 years. Convenient timing, Counselor. Miss Thorne, you are not recognized to speak in this chamber. Your presence here is already a courtesy given your condition. Vex gestured to her marked arms. The curse you carry represents a clear and present danger. During your last episode, you killed 2 loyal guards and nearly brought down a wing of the keep. What happens when the next episode is worse? When you lose control during a council session or in a populated area? She saved our forces at Raven's Keep. Kale's voice came from the gallery. He stood in full dress uniform despite the travel stains and bandages. Her strategy won that engagement. 47 casualties against a target that should have cost us 300. I was there. I saw what her mind can do. And we commend her service, another counselor interjected. This was Lord Brent, the logistics officer who'd seconded the Raven's Keep mission. But Counselor Vex raises valid concerns. Supernatural abilities are unpredictable. History shows that Moonfire wielders eventually lose control, always with catastrophic results. My father controlled it, Elara said. For 30 years, he used his abilities to serve this kingdom. The only catastrophe was his execution. Your father was convicted of treason. My father was murdered for threatening to expose corruption. She took a step forward, her voice rising. He found something in the intelligence records, something that implicated people in power. He tried to bring it to light and was silenced, the same way you're trying to silence me now. Careful, Miss Thorne. Vex's voice had gone cold. Accusations of conspiracy are serious matters. Do you have evidence to support such claims? I'm working on it. 7 years of records take time to analyze. 7 years. Vex stood, moving to the front of the dais. 7 years you've carried grief and anger, looking for someone to blame besides the man who actually committed treason. Your father broke his oath to the crown, attempted to use forbidden weapons against civilian populations. These are documented facts, witnessed and confirmed by multiple officers. Lies. The word came out flat, certain. My father would never target civilians. His entire philosophy of warfare was built on minimizing collateral damage. People change when they gain power they can't control. The Moonfire corrupts, Miss Thorne. It whispered promises to your father just as it's whispering to you now, and eventually, inevitably, those promises turned to madness. Ronan's hand found Elara's elbow, a gentle warning. She was letting Vex bait her, draw her into emotional response when she needed tactical thinking. She took a breath, forced herself to step back. The council will now vote, Vex continued, on a motion to restructure military command. Operational authority will be distributed among a committee of senior generals rather than concentrated in the king's hands. This ensures that no single point of failure, no personal compromise can endanger the entire war effort. And who leads this committee? Ronan asked quietly. A rotating chairmanship, selected by council vote every 6 months. Checks and balances, Your Majesty. The system our founders intended before your family centralized power through generations of emergency declarations. It was brilliant, Elara realized. Vex wasn't proposing tyranny or obvious power grab. He was wrapping his coup in the language of reform, making it sound reasonable, even necessary. And in a room full of nobles who chafed under royal authority for decades, that message would resonate. "You're fracturing the command structure in the middle of a war," she said. "Committees don't make battlefield decisions. They debate and compromise and arrive at solutions that satisfy everyone and accomplish nothing. We've been losing this war under centralized command for 3 years," Vex countered. "Perhaps a new approach is warranted." "We just won our first major victory under centralized command. Or did you miss the part where Raven's Keep is burning? One victory doesn't erase 3 years of failure. The border is still compromised. Our resources are still depleted. And now we have a supernatural threat living in the keep itself, one that nearly killed loyal soldiers and shows no signs of stability." The debate went on for another hour. Counselors spoke for and against the motion. Arguments about military efficiency versus political safeguards. Questions about precedent and constitutional authority. The kind of procedural warfare that could grind on for days if allowed. Elara watched Ronan during it all, saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of defending himself against attacks that came wrapped in the language of civic duty. He'd fought battles on a dozen fronts, made impossible decisions, carried the burden of every casualty. And now he had to justify his right to lead to men who'd never stood on a battlefield, who counted costs in abstract numbers rather than names and faces. Finally, Vex called for the vote. "All in favor of the restructuring motion?" 7 hands rose, a majority. The motion carried. Ronan stood very still, his expression carved from stone. "The motion is noted. However, as king, I retain the constitutional authority to reject council recommendations during active military campaigns. I'm invoking that authority now." "Your Majesty, that authority was granted for emergency circumstances. This is a matter of systemic reform." "We are at war, Counselor. That constitutes emergency circumstances by any definition." Ronan's voice carried steel now. "I will consider your recommendations when the Western Pacts have been defeated and the borders secured. Until then, military command remains with the crown." The chamber erupted, counselors shouting over each other, nobles in the galleries adding their voices to the chaos. Vex raised his hands for silence, his face a mask of concern. "Your Majesty, if you refuse the council's directive, you leave us no choice but to question your fitness for command. The law is clear. A king who cannot accept constitutional limits has forfeited his right to rule." "Are you declaring this a coup?" Ronan asked softly. "I'm declaring this a reckoning. The system has been broken for too long. Your father ruled as tyrant, ignoring council advice, executing loyal servants who dared question his judgment. You've shown some of the same tendencies, Your Majesty, protecting the daughter of a traitor, accepting counsel from someone who carries a curse that's killed hundreds throughout history, making battlefield decisions based on emotional attachment rather than strategic necessity. Everything I've done has been to win this war and reform the system peacefully. You're demanding I surrender authority to a committee that will spend weeks debating decisions that need to be made in hours. That's not reform, that's sabotage. Then prove you're different from your father." Vex's voice was reasonable, almost gentle. "Accept the reforms. Show the kingdom that law matters more than personal power. Be the king who broke the cycle." Elara felt the trap closing. Vex had positioned this perfectly. If Ronan accepted, he lost operational control during the most critical phase of the war. If he refused, he looked like the tyrant Vex was painting him as. Either way, Vex won, unless they changed the game entirely. "What if we propose a compromise?" Elara said. Every head turned to her. Vex's eyes narrowed slightly. "You're not recognized to speak, Miss Thorne." "I recognize her." Ronan's voice was firm. "What compromise?" Elara moved to the center of the speaking floor, her mind working through the angles. "Counselor Vex is right that the system needs reform. The concentration of power in one person creates vulnerabilities. But he's also wrong that committees can manage active warfare. So we split the difference. Ronan retains tactical command for the duration of the current campaign. In exchange, he issues a decree establishing the reforms Vex proposes, effective immediately after peace is achieved. Constitutional limits on royal authority. Council veto power over military deployments. Territorial autonomy for regional lords. Everything Vex wants, just delayed until the immediate crisis is resolved. Silence. Vex studying her with new calculation in his eyes. Why would you propose this, he asked. You've been arguing against me since you arrived. Because I'm not arguing against reform. I'm arguing against timing. And because, unlike you, I've actually been in that war room, working through the logistics and seeing how decisions get made, committees are fine for policy, they're death for warfare. And after the war, when the crisis has passed and the king has consolidated his power even further, what guarantee do we have that these reforms will actually be implemented? My guarantee. Elara pulled out a parchment she'd prepared that morning, anticipating something like this. A blood oath, legally binding, that I will personally ensure these reforms are executed. If Ronan reneges, I will testify against him before this council and accept whatever punishment you deem appropriate. Ronan looked at her sharply, clearly not having been told about this plan. She met his gaze steadily. Trust me. Vex came down from the dais, taking the parchment and reading it carefully. His expression was unreadable. You would bind yourself to ensure your allies' compliance. That's either remarkably principled or remarkably foolish. It's pragmatic. We win the war first. We reform the system second. We do both, or we risk losing everything to the Western Pax while we're busy fighting each other. And the curse, your supernatural instability. I'll submit to binding protocols, moonsteel cuffs during council sessions. Supervise access to the keep, whatever safeguards you require. But I continue serving as strategic advisor because, like it or not, I'm the best tactical mind you have besides Ronan. The chamber had gone quiet. Everyone watching this negotiation play out, seeing power being traded and boundaries being drawn in real time. Finally, Vex spoke. Your Majesty, if you agree to issue the reform decree today, to be implemented upon cessation of hostilities, and if Miss Thorne accepts the binding protocols I will draft, then I will withdraw the restructuring motion, temporarily. Ronan's jaw was tight. Elara could see the war happening behind his eyes. Pride fighting pragmatism. The desire to tell Vex where to shove his compromise, fighting the knowledge that political capital had limits and needed to be spent carefully. I agree, he said finally. Draft your reforms. I'll sign them today. But military command remains with the crown until the Western Pax are defeated or sue for peace. Non-negotiable. Acceptable. Vex extended his hand. After a long moment, Ronan shook it. The council session dissolved into procedural discussions about implementation and oversight. Elara slipped out while they were arguing about committee structures, her mind already moving to the next problem. She'd bought them time. Maybe a month, maybe 3 if they were lucky. But eventually they'd have to deliver on these promises or face worse than a political coup. Ronan found her an hour later in the war room, staring at the same maps they'd been studying for weeks. He entered quietly, closing the door behind him. You promised them reforms without asking me first. You would have refused and turned this into a constitutional crisis we couldn't win, not with public opinion already questioning your judgment. I notice you volunteered to be the enforcer, to testify against me if I failed to implement Vex's agenda. Someone had to guarantee it, better me than him. Ronan moved to stand beside her, his presence solid and familiar. You realize what you've done. Tied yourself to my administration so thoroughly that if I fall, you fall with me? I was already tied to you. This just makes it official. She looked up at him. Besides, Vex is right about the reforms. The system is broken. Your father's concentration of power created the conditions for tyranny. If we want to prevent that from happening again, we need constitutional limits. My father also understood something Vex doesn't, that war requires decisive leadership, that committees debate while soldiers die. Then we win the war decisively and implement the reforms fairly. Show the kingdom that centralized command can be a tool rather than a weapon. That power can be wielded responsibly and then surrendered voluntarily. Voluntarily surrendering power. Do you know how rare that is in history? No, but I know my father believed in it. He told me once that the measure of a leader wasn't how much authority they could accumulate, but how much they could release without causing chaos. Maybe that's what he was trying to teach you before he died. Ronan was quiet for a long moment. He came to me the night before his arrest. Said he'd found evidence that my father was prolonging the war deliberately. using emergency powers to justify restrictions on civil liberties, awarding military contracts to favored nobles, building a system of patronage and control that had nothing to do with actually winning the war. Elara's breath caught. Did he show you the evidence? He said he would, after he'd organized it, made it undeniable. But he never got the chance, and Ronan's voice roughened. I hesitated, didn't commit to helping him immediately. I think someone was listening. Someone reported the conversation, and by dawn, Marcus was under arrest. Who knew about your meeting? No one. We met in the gardens late at night, spoke quietly. He turned to face her fully. But looking back, I remember seeing someone in the shadows near the west wall. I thought it was a guard, but what if it was Vex? He was already on the council then. Already positioning himself as my father's loyal advisor. Vex. Elara felt pieces clicking into place. He's been playing a long game, decades long. Before they could discuss it further, a guard burst into the war room, his face pale. Your Majesty, Western Pact forces have been spotted moving on the capital. 15,000 troops, 3 days out. Commander Thane is leading them personally. The bottom dropped out of Elara's stomach. Thane, the revolutionary, the ideological opponent who'd been fighting to overthrow the Alpha system entirely. If he was leading this attack personally, it meant he'd committed everything to one final push. He's going for decapitation, she said. Kill the king, seize the capital, declare a new government. He knows our forces are spread across the borders. The capital garrison is what, 3,000 troops? 4,000, Ronan corrected grimly, against 15,000 veterans who've been fighting for 3 years. We need to recall the border forces. They're 2 weeks away minimum. Thane will be here in 3 days. Ronan moved to the maps, his command presence settling over him like armor. We defend with what we have. Make him pay for every street, every building. Turn the capital into a meat grinder. That will kill thousands of civilians. I know, his voice was flat, but the alternative is surrendering the kingdom to a revolutionary who will execute everyone in this keep and declare himself liberator. At least this way, we have a chance. Elara studied the city maps, the defensive positions, the angles of attack. Her mind worked through scenarios, calculating odds and losses. All the numbers came up red. Unless, what if we evacuate the civilians? Get them out through the southern gates before Thane's forces arrive. Then you can defend without worrying about collateral damage. 3 days isn't enough time to evacuate a city of 40,000 people. No, but it's enough to evacuate the non-combatants. Anyone who can't fight leaves. Everyone else arms up and defends their home. You've got a population that's angry about 3 years of war. Channel that anger into resistance. Ronan looked at her, something like hope flickering in his eyes. Urban warfare with civilian participation. It's risky. Everything is risky now, but it's better than watching helpless people die in crossfire. The next 3 days passed in a blur of controlled chaos. Evacuation orders went out. The southern gates opened, and a flood of humanity poured through. Children, elderly, anyone who couldn't hold a weapon. The civilian militia formed, 15,000 citizens of the capital city who'd lost family to the war and were ready to fight back. Elara worked alongside Ronan, planning defensive positions and fallback lines. They fortified key buildings, stockpiled weapons, prepared the city to bleed any force that tried to take it. On the third day, Thane's army appeared on the horizon like a storm made flesh. 15,000 soldiers in battle formation, their banners displaying the broken crown symbol of the revolutionary cause. They looked disciplined, well-supplied, confident. An army that had won too many battles to believe it could lose. Ronan stood on the palace battlements. Was washing them up. Elara stood beside him, feeling the coiled tension in the air. Below, the capital defenders took positions, weapons ready, faces grim. He'll offer terms first, Ronan said quietly. Thane's a romantic, believes in the nobility of his cause. He'll give us a chance to surrender. Will you take it? No, because surrender means execution for everyone who supported the crown. He's not offering mercy, he's offering theater before the slaughter. As predicted, a rider approached under white flag. Ronan went down to the main gate to hear the terms, Elara following despite the protests of his guards. The messenger was young, barely 20, wearing the revolutionary uniform with pride. He delivered Thane's terms in a voice that shook only slightly. Surrender the king and his council. Accept the new government. In exchange, the city would be spared and the war would end. Tell Commander Thane, Ronan said clearly, that the Northern Kingdom doesn't negotiate with traitors. If he wants this capital, he'll have to take it over our corpses. The messenger paled but nodded. He rode back to the army, and moments later the drums began. The sound of war coming home. The attack launched at dawn. Thane's forces hit the eastern walls with siege equipment and moonfire artillery. The first wave crashed against the defenders like ocean against stone. Men screamed and died. Stone exploded. Fire bloomed. Elara watched from the command post, tracking positions and casualties, feeding information to Ronan, who adjusted deployments with brutal efficiency. They'd prepared layered defenses, each fallback position stronger than the last. When the eastern walls fell, the defenders retreated to prepared positions in the streets. Urban warfare was hell. Every building a fortress. Every corner a potential ambush. Thane's numerical advantage meant less in the narrow streets where his forces couldn't maneuver freely. The civilian militia fought with desperate courage, knowing their families had fled south, and this was the line that mattered. But numbers still mattered. Slowly and inexorably, Thane's forces pushed deeper into the city. The defenders bled them but couldn't stop them. By midday, the Revolutionary Army had taken a quarter of the capital and was pushing toward the palace. In the command post, Elara's moonfire curse began to pulse. She felt it building, the power responding to violence and death around her. The marks on her arms glowed faintly silver. Not now, she muttered, gripping the table edge. Hold, just hold. Ronan noticed. Elara, if you lose control here, I won't. But she could feel the curse straining against her will like a caged animal. The moonsteel cuffs Vex had required helped somewhat, but they were designed to contain, not eliminate. If her control slipped, the resulting explosion would kill everyone in the palace. A runner arrived, breathless and bleeding. Your Majesty, the northern barricade has fallen. There are 3 streets from the palace. Captain Kale requests permission to execute the final fallback. Granted. Ronan turned to his remaining officers. Oh, which way am I reaches? All forces retreat to palace grounds. We make our stand here. The officers dispersed. Within an hour, every defender still alive had pulled back to the palace complex. 4,000 soldiers and militia had become 1,500. The rest dead or captured. The mathematics of siege warfare playing out in blood and broken bodies. Thane's army surrounded the palace, siege engines positioning for the final assault. Then a horn sounded and the attack paused. A figure rode forward under white flag. Tall, commanding, wearing the armor of a general who'd led from the front. Commander Thane himself. Ronan met him in the palace courtyard, the 2 men facing each other across 10 feet of blood-stained stone. Elara stayed close, her hand on a dagger she barely knew how to use but carried anyway because symbols mattered in moments like this. Thane was younger than she'd expected. His hair gray-threaded, but his bearing strong, eyes carrying the weight of conviction. He looked at Ronan not with hatred, but with something sadder. Disappointment. You could have been great, Thane said. You had the chance to be different from your father, to reform the system peacefully. Instead, you clung to power and dragged us all into this. I was reforming the system, Ronan replied. I issued the decree, constitutional limits, council authority, everything you claim to want. After how many years of war? How many dead? And only because you were forced into it by political pressure. Thane shook his head. The Alpha system is slavery, Ronan. Dressed in tradition and law, but slavery nonetheless. People bound by birth to serve, claimed without consent, their lives measured by how useful they are to the crown. I won't let that continue. So you'll replace it with what? Revolutionary chaos? Committee rule that debates while enemies mass? You've seen what happens to kingdoms without central authority. They fragment, they fall. Then we'll build something new, something that doesn't require kings. People need leaders, Thane. They need someone to make the hard decisions and accept the consequences. Democracy is beautiful in theory. In practice, it's too slow for war and too compromised for peace. Then we'll learn to be faster, to compromise better. Thane's expression hardened. Surrender now. I'll give you and your officers safe conduct out of the kingdom. The people can decide their own future without you. You know I can't do that. I know. You're your father's son. You'd rather die than admit your philosophy is wrong. Thane turned back toward his lines. Then die well, brother. You've earned that much. The final assault began an hour later. Thane's forces hit the palace from 3 sides simultaneously. Artillery pounded the walls. Moonfire mages sent gouts of silver flame that melted stone and flesh alike. The defenders fought with the desperation of men who knew there was no fallback position after this. The courtyard became a killing field. Bodies piled in the gateways. Blood ran in rivers between the cobblestones. Elara stayed in the command post, coordinating the defense as long as communication lines held. But her vision was starting to blur, the Moonfire curse responding to the massive death toll around her. Every life ending sent a pulse through her awareness. Every scream fed the power building in her chest. I can't hold it much longer, she gasped. Ronan was beside her in an instant. Then let it go. Controlled burn. Channel it toward the enemy. I don't know how to control it. Last time I killed our own people. Last time you were unconscious and poisoned. This time you're aware and making a choice. You can do this. You don't know that. I know you're Marcus Thorne's daughter. I know you've spent your whole life learning control and discipline and how to turn chaos into strategy. The Moonfire is just another tool. Use it. Elara looked at him, at the certainty in his eyes. The trust. After everything, after all the grief and anger and impossible choices, he believed in her capacity to master this. Maybe that was enough. She moved to the courtyard, Ronan beside her. Around them, the battle raged. Kael fought near the gates, his sword work brutal and efficient despite his missing arm. The civilian militia held the walls. Ordinary people doing extraordinary things because someone had to. Elara closed her eyes and stopped fighting the curse. Let it rise. The Moonfire flooded through her, vast and hungry and alien. It wanted destruction. Wanted to burn everything in sight until nothing remained but ash and screaming. But she was Marcus Thorne's daughter, had learned that power was nothing without purpose. She opened her eyes and they blazed silver. The Moonfire that erupted from her was different this time. Not wild explosion, but directed lance. She aimed it at the siege engines, at the mage corps, preparing another bombardment. Silver flame leaped from her hands, crossing the courtyard in a heartbeat, striking with surgical precision. The siege tower collapsed, burning from the inside out. The mage formation scattered, their shields unable to withstand the raw power she channeled. For 30 seconds, she was a weapon more devastating than anything in Thane's arsenal. Then the curse turned on her. Pain ripped through every nerve. Her body arched, convulsing. The Moonfire that had been her tool became her torment, burning her from the inside. She felt herself starting to fracture, her consciousness shattering under the pressure. Ronan caught her as she fell, his arms around her, his voice in her ear. Stay with me. You controlled it once. You can control it again. But the power was too much. She'd channeled more than her body could handle, and now it was consuming her. Silver cracks spread across her skin, light bleeding through like her entire being was made of fractured glass. She was dying, the curse eating her alive for daring to use it. Through the pain, she heard the battle still raging. Heard Kael shouting orders, heard the clash of steel and the screams of dying men. The work wasn't finished. The defense was still failing, and she was burning out like a candle in a hurricane. Then Thane was there, appearing out of the smoke and chaos, his sword raised. Not targeting her, but Ronan. The final move in this long game. Kill the king and end the war. Elara saw it happening in slow motion. Thane's blade descending. Ronan twisting to shield her with his body. The sword that should have taken her heart instead piercing his side. Ronan's blood splashed hot across her face. His eyes went wide with shock and pain. He slumped against her, suddenly heavy, suddenly mortal. No, the word tore from her throat. No, you don't get to do this. The Moonfire inside her that had been destroying her found new purpose. Not weapon, not curse, but tool for one specific task. Healing. She pressed her hands to Ronan's wound, not caring about the blood, not caring about anything except the life bleeding out beneath her fingers. The moonfire responded, flowing from her into him. She felt it knitting torn flesh, repairing damage, fighting death with the same energy that caused it. But healing was harder than destruction, required more control, more focus. And she was already at her limit, her body shutting down from channeling power she shouldn't have been able to touch. Somewhere distant, she heard Thane's voice. Heard him calling retreat. The moonfire display had broken his assault, convinced him the cost was too high. The revolutionary army was pulling back, leaving their dead and wounded behind. They'd won. But Ronan's eyes were closing, his heartbeat irregular beneath her palm. The wound was too deep. She'd stopped the bleeding but couldn't repair all the damage. Couldn't reach the injuries that mattered most. Stay, she whispered. You promised we'd reform the system together. You promised. His hand found hers, weak but deliberate. You don't need me. Never did. You're the one who saw through it all. Who found the patterns? Who knew how to win? I need you to stop being noble and keep breathing. Trying, she poured more moonfire into the healing, feeling her own life force draining with it. The marks on her arms blazed so bright they lit the courtyard. Other defenders had gathered now, watching this impossible thing. Watching the cursed girl who'd terrified them now fighting death itself to save their king. Kale knelt beside them, his face drawn with exhaustion and grief. Elara, if you keep channeling, you'll die too. Then we die together. She looked at Ronan, at the man who'd executed her father and somehow become her partner, who'd trusted her when no one else would, who'd believed she could master the curse that terrified everyone else. I'm not finishing this story alone. Yes, a voice said from behind them. You will. Counselor Vex appeared, flanked by healers and guards. He looked older suddenly, weariness written in every line of his face. Let the healers work. You've done enough. Not until he's stable. He's stable enough, and you're minutes from burning yourself out completely. Vex's tone was surprisingly gentle. Let go, child. Some battles can't be won with willpower alone. Elara wanted to refuse. But her vision was graying, her strength finally failing. She released the moonfire connection and collapsed beside Ronan, both of them bleeding and broken and somehow still alive. The healers swarmed around them. Bandages and medicines and the organized chaos of emergency medicine. Someone carried Elara to the infirmary. She drifted in and out of consciousness, the moonfire curse finally burning itself out like a fire consuming the last of its fuel. When she woke, 3 days had passed. She was in a private room, sunlight streaming through high windows. Her arms were bandaged, the silver marks faded to faint scars. The moonfire presence in her mind had dimmed to almost nothing. Still there but sleeping. Dormant again. Ronan sat in a chair beside her bed. His side was bandaged heavily, his face pale but his eyes were clear and alert. You're alive, she said, her voice rough. So are you, against all probability and medical expectation. He smiled faintly. Apparently we're both too stubborn to die properly. Thane retreated, took his remaining forces and pulled back to Western territories. The siege cost him nearly 5,000 casualties. He won't be attacking again soon. Ronan's expression turned somber. We lost 4,200 defending the capital. Another 800 civilian militia. The price was high. Elara closed her eyes. Numbers, statistics, each one a name and a face and a family left grieving. We won. We survived. There's a difference. The door opened. Counselor Vex entered, looking older and more worn than she'd ever seen him. He carried documents, official papers, with the royal seal. Miss Thorne, I'm glad to see you awake. We have matters to discuss. If this is about the binding protocols, it's about truth. Vex settled into another chair with a sigh. I owe you both an explanation. About your father, about the conspiracy, about why I've been pushing so hard for reforms. Elara's breath caught. Ronan leaned forward despite the obvious pain it caused. 7 years ago, Vex began, Marcus Thorne discovered something that should have remained hidden. The old king, Ronan's father, was deliberately prolonging the war, awarding military contracts to favored nobles, using emergency powers to restrict civil liberties and consolidate control, building a system that benefited him and his allies while ordinary people bled. I know this, Ronan said quietly. Marcus came to me the night before his arrest. What you don't know is that I was listening, not to betray Marcus, but to witness. I'd suspected the same things but lacked proof. When Marcus laid it all out to you, when he showed his evidence, I knew someone had to act. Vex's voice roughened, so I went to the king, told him what Marcus had discovered, and suggested that Marcus be arrested immediately before the evidence could spread. The room went very cold. You betrayed him, Elara said. You're the reason he died. I orchestrated his arrest, yes, but not his death. I argued for imprisonment, for a quiet trial with limited witnesses. The king chose public execution instead to make an example, to terrify anyone else who might question his authority. And you did nothing. I did everything I could without getting myself killed alongside him. Vex met her eyes steadily. I've spent 7 years building a coalition, placing people in key positions, waiting for the old king to die and his son to take power, waiting for the opportunity to force the reforms Marcus died trying to achieve. By poisoning me, Elara said, by creating crises and manipulating conflicts, by demonstrating that the current system leads inevitably to chaos and catastrophe. Yes, Vex didn't look away. I poisoned you to prove you were dangerous, pushed Ronan toward constitutional crisis to force his hand, used Thane's revolutionary fervor to create a threat serious enough to justify dramatic action. Every crisis, every pressure point, all designed to arrive at this moment. And what moment is that? Ronan's voice was dangerous. Vex pulled out the documents, spread them on the bed. The reform decree you signed 3 days ago. While you were fighting and dying and proving that centralized authority can be wielded honorably, I had it ratified by the full council. Constitutional limits are now law. The Alpha system is fundamentally restructured. The changes Marcus Thorne died for are now reality. Silence. Elara looked at the documents, saw her father's vision written in legal language and royal seal. Everything he'd fought for. Everything that had cost him his life. You manipulated a war to achieve political reform, Ronan said slowly. Thousands died so you could prove a philosophical point. Thousands died because the system was broken and would have killed millions more if left unchanged. I chose the lesser evil, Your Majesty. The same calculation you make every time you order men into battle. Vex's expression was tired but unbowed. You can execute me for it if you wish. Charge me with conspiracy or treason or whatever crime fits. But the reforms will stand. Marcus Thorne's legacy will live. Elara wanted to rage at him, wanted to grieve for her father, and hate the man who'd orchestrated his death. But she was too exhausted, and the logic was too sound. Vex had done a monstrous thing for what he believed were moral reasons. The trolley problem played out across years and thousands of lives. What happens now? She asked. Now we rebuild. Vex stood gathering his papers. The war with the Western Pax will end within months. Thane is defeated but not destroyed. He'll negotiate eventually, accept the new system because it gives him most of what he wanted without more bloodshed. He looked at Ronan. You'll remain king, but a king bound by law rather than tradition alone. Council veto power, territorial autonomy. The claiming laws abolished, everything Marcus proposed. And you? Ronan asked. I retire. Let younger minds handle the implementation. My work is finished. He moved toward the door, paused. For what it's worth, I am sorry about Marcus. He was a good man, deserved better than the death I helped arrange. But I'm not sorry about the result. Sometimes the cost is high, and you pay it anyway because the alternative is worse. He left. The door closed behind him with soft finality. Elara and Ronan sat in silence, processing everything. The layers of conspiracy and manipulation. The calculations that treated human lives as variables in some vast equation. The uncomfortable truth that Vex might have been right, that the system had needed breaking even if the method was brutal. Your father would be proud, Ronan said finally. Everything he fought for, it's happening. He'd hate how it happened, the lies, the manipulation. Maybe, but he was also practical enough to understand that change requires leverage. That power doesn't surrender itself voluntarily. Ronan reached for her hand, wincing at the movement. We have a chance now to build something better, to prove that authority can be limited without becoming impotent. That's worth something. Is it worth 4,000 lives? I don't know. I'm not sure we ever get to know if the price we paid was worth what we bought. We just keep moving forward and try to honor the cost. Weeks later, they stood together in the Great Hall for what the court was calling the dual coronation. Not a crowning, but a restructuring. Ronan retained his throne, but under the new constitutional limits. And beside him, they installed a new position. Chief Strategic Officer. The person who would share command authority and provide checks against any single person holding too much power. The role had been designed for Elara. The ceremony was brief. Oaths exchanged. Papers signed. When it ended, Elara had authority equal to the king in military matters. Could veto his decisions. Could command troops in her own right. The partnership they'd built in the war room was now enshrined in law. That evening, they stood together in the war room, which was slowly transforming. Maps still covered the walls, but now they showed trade routes instead of troop movements. The tools of warfare repurposed for reconstruction. We should finalize the council appointments, Ronan said. 4 seats are still vacant. Agreed, and the southern roads need repair before winter. They worked late into the night, as they had for months now. Debating. Planning. The rhythm of partnership, familiar and comfortable. Near midnight, KL appeared with reports from the border. His daughter was home safely, living in the capital under a new identity. He'd earned back trust through the siege defense, though the weight of his betrayal would never fully lift. Western pacts are requesting formal negotiations, KL reported. Thane himself wants to discuss terms. Let him come, Ronan said. We'll talk, see if there's a path to peace. After KL left, Elara stretched. Do you ever miss it? The simplicity of warfare, clear enemies, decisive battles? Every day, but I don't miss the Karn. Ronan looked at her. This is what's necessary, what I want doesn't really factor. That was the lesson they'd both learned. That leadership meant doing what needed doing. That power was responsibility made visible. That the only way to wield authority ethically was to constantly question whether you should be wielding it at all. Tomorrow starts early, she said, moving toward the door. He nodded, and always does. She paused. Thank you for trusting me, for giving me the chance to finish what my father started. Thank you for making me better than I was. They exchanged nods, partners who'd been through hell and come out changed. Not lovers, not quite friends. Something more complicated and probably more enduring. Elara walked to her quarters through corridors that still smelled faintly of smoke, despite months of cleaning. The palace bore its scars, as did the people who inhabited it. But scars meant survival, meant healing, meant the story continued. Outside, the moon rose over the capital, pale and clean. The same moon that had witnessed her father's execution and her own near death. The same moon that would watch over whatever came next. Elara stood at the window, looking out over the kingdom she'd helped save and was now helping rebuild. The work would never be finished. There would always be new problems, new conflicts, new decisions. But she wasn't alone in it. Had a partner who understood the weight. Had a system with safeguards and limits. Had her father's legacy living on in laws that would outlast them all. Not the ending she'd imagined when she infiltrated the Moonfall Ball 4 months ago. Not the revenge or vindication her grief had demanded. But it was better, because it was real, messy and complicated and ongoing. The kind of victory that required constant work to maintain. The kind of peace built on hard choices and mutual accountability. Elara Thorne, daughter of a general executed for treason, co-commander of a kingdom, learning to be something other than tyranny. Not a queen, not a savior, just a woman doing the work and trying to honor the cost. The moon watched, the city slept, and tomorrow the work would continue.